And here we go for part 2 of 6.2, stress and emotion. So, as we're moving through the HPA adrenal axis, right, let's see what's happening. Now, emotions that are activated in the HPA axis are anxiety, fear, and anger. Okay? And I might make a case, if I was to suggest my conception of basic emotions, they're right on here. Fear is the basic emotion. Anger is closely associated to it. Notice these come to us out of this very ancient part of the brain, out of the limbic system, out of the amygdala, right? So the emotions activated in that HPA axis, relatively simple. Notice there isn't, it's not a long list, right? Now, how might we study this in the laboratory? And this is kind of, leading us to research in emotion, a later lecture. Also, maybe potentially a paper choice for you. Under the threat of negative social evaluation, so what you do is you bring people into the laboratory, and in the experimental condition, you say, hey, you're going to have to give a speech, right? So the positive social identity is threatened. They do this with the Trier stress social stress task. So you're told you're going to give an impromptu speech to an audience of evaluators, and these people are trained to react like real buttheads, right? They react with critical, frustrated expressions. So imagine how many of you like to do public speaking? It doesn't bother me so much, but I really like to see people smile or chuckle or kind of open up as I'm speaking. If people are all like, right, I'm going to take that cue, right, I'm going to read their nonverbal behaviors, and it's going to wig me out. So that's what those people are assigned to that condition, and that then activates the autonomic nervous system. It kicks that HPA axis into gear. Now that we have a technique in the laboratory, what this means is we can begin to massage the technique and maybe look at different effects. So, in this case, participants exposed to the Trier task, the participant cortisol level was measured. Participants' self-report levels of fear and anger were also recorded. Anger correlated with the cortisol increase, but fear did not. So isn't this fascinating that at this level of analysis, at least, we can differentiate between fear and anger, and at least in this experiment, it looks like cortisol is the culprit, the level of cortisol. Now, immune system suppression and illness, sickness behaviors are activated by the release of cytokines. These include sleep and withdrawal behaviors. What do you do when you get sick? Well, most of us, we want to sleep and we don't want to be around anyone. We would just want to kind of huddle on the couch or the bed and pretty much leave me alone unless you're willing to bring me something to eat or drink, right? So this is adaptive because we naturally seek rest and seclusion as a result of oncoming sickness. It allows our body to kind of restore itself. So it also inhibits social, exploratory, and aggressive behaviors as a result. Similar to submissive behavior akin to shame and embarrassment, and more work needs to be done to kind of link up, see what's the same and see what's different, as we saw fear and anger differentiated in the previous slide. Now, this is all part of sympathetic versus parasympathetic activation. So sympathetic activation, as we discussed, is typically associated with negative emotions. Fear, anger, anxiety are all likely to be associated with sympathetic activation. Less is known about the activating qualities of positive emotions. Note that the research in emotion has been tremendously biased towards negative emotions. And we can see that if we want to design interventions would usually be designed for negative emotions. We don't necessarily want to intervene in positive emotions. So the bias kind of makes sense in the way it's been researched. Notice also that it's negative emotions that often lead to aggression, violence, and cost society, whereas positive emotions not so much. Now, Porges suggests that the ventral vagal complex, it's controlled by the vagus nerve, is associated with the activation of positive emotions. So this vagal nerve complex is associated with the parasympathetic system, right? The vagal complex regulates facial muscles. Interesting. expressions perhaps, head movements, controlling gaze activity, and vocalizations might change the nature of our vocalizations. So the ventral vagal complex is present only in mammals, so it's a relatively new mechanism, in the grand scheme, in the evolutionary grand scheme of things. The vagal nerve reduces the cardiac output as well as respiration, leading to calming, greater cognitive flexibility, increased ability to pay attention. Breathe. Breathe. So those of you who are fond of controlling your breathing, those of you who are fond of meditating, what are you actually manipulating? Well, it's the vagal complex, right? So you're slowing your heart rate and you're slowing your respiration. Now, what we see is that people differ in this idea of vagal tone. We are individuals, so expect individual differences. Higher vagal tone can lead to the experience of more positive emotion, kindness, and warmth. Right? So to the extent that we can manipulate vagal tone and we can keep it on kind of the downside, that is lower the response pattern, then we should experience more positive emotions. And some tests of this, if we give people, a vagal tone or assess people's vagal tone, right, as an individual difference, those with higher vagal tone, right, will interpret Rorschach tests explaining in more positive emotional qualities as they are exposed to the Rorschach test. Right? Higher vagal tone is related to cognitive flexibility, may lead to a more nuanced emotional expression, superior emotional regulation potential. And I think this is so apropos to what we're seeing today, especially politically. Some people just seem so frickin' angry all the time. And remember what Ekman told us. People that have trait hostility are looking for reasons to be angry. And these people get jacked up so quickly, right? They're going into a store and someone says, I'm sorry, you have to wear a mask in the store. And immediately they're off and running. They're all jacked up. You can watch them get tense, their fist ball up, their voice changes, and they're ready to do combat. And it's like, whoa, chill the hell out, buddy. This is just for everybody's safety. What is got you going to such a great degree? And these are people that probably possess very low vagal tone, right? And so what we see then is, these they don't have a tremendously nuanced experience. They go straight to anger and aggression with nothing in between. Okay, so the role of perceived social support, right? Strong emotional connections. They'll allow an opportunity to share complex emotions. This can act as a buffer to uncertainty and anxiety. Can be measured as lower baselines of cortisol by calming the HPA axis system. So for our assignment, right, for your next discussion board, it is an experiment for you. And I'm using the term experiment loosely. Obviously, we're not randomly assigning you to conditions, etc., but a chance to manipulate your vagal tone. So there's a brief, super brief article in the discussion board. I want you to read the article, please, and then I want you to experiment with the manipulation of your vagal tone. And like I said at the beginning of the lecture in part 1, I know some of you have already completed it, so awesome for you guys. For those that haven't, I'm really urging you to try this because you are the ultimate beneficiary. Find a way to, and it lists, right, the article lists about half a dozen different ways to manipulate your vagal tone. And if this is something that you can accomplish habitually, notice then your overall vagal tone will become increasingly higher. And the benefits you should reap is lower stress, and a more positive emotional outlook on life. And I think, that's kind of a win-win. So check it out, give it a try, see how it works, and if that, if this conversation doesn't increase your vagal tone, then maybe this will. And there's a very young cerebellum as she came into the house, and Kyle just giving her the hug of all time. These guys definitely increase my vagal tone interacting with them, and they truly represent a plus in my life. And when I'm stressed out, maybe there's nothing better than finding a cat to pet, because we get to do the oxytocin game with each other, and remember that from the stress model that we talked about. So guys, thank you. I hope you have a great day. I hope you enjoy the assignment. Adios.